Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to now introduce you to Katelyn. Katelyn's a 25-year-old schoolteacher from Tamworth. She was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia in February of this year and is on a special leave pass from her doctors to share her story with us. Ladies and gentlemen, Katelyn Mole.
I was born in Sydney and lived here for 11 years before moving to Tamworth. After trying to hate it for a good couple of years, I eventually grew to love it. So much so that I moved back after finishing my teaching degree and spent a good part of last year looking for a house to buy. In November last year, I did buy a house, which is sort of funny because looking back now, I had no idea what was just around the corner, but that was probably around the time that my symptoms started to show. I just didn't realise what they were at the time. In January this year, I went to give blood and was told that they couldn't use it due to abnormalities and that I needed to see my doctor. So I did. And whilst there were some unusual levels, it wasn't enough to warrant action at the time. My doctor decided that we would be on the safe side and to check the blood again in a month. So in February, I had a blood test done, and the very next day, while I was at work, I got an urgent call to get to the doctors. Within an hour, I went from standing in a classroom teaching a room full of kids to sitting in a doctor's office being told that I had cancer. It's crazy how quickly things can change. My doctor told me to get to the local hospital, to have more blood tests done, and then to go home and pack a bag because I would need to get to hospital in Newcastle the following day to have more tests done and commence treatment. I was told to expect to be away for 4 to 6 weeks, and I figured I could manage 4 to 6 weeks, that I'd get down there, get it done, and get back to work. Once I got there, the timeline quickly extended to 6 months. This time I went through my leave balances for work, checked my bank account, and figured I could manage 6 months, and prepared myself for 6 months of treatment, excited at the prospect of returning to work in time for the second half of the year. I work in a relatively small primary school in regional Tamworth and have had the absolute privilege of teaching the same bunch of amazing kids for the past 3 years and was so looking forward to spending their final year with them and doing all the Year 6 things like the grad and the formal. Instead, I've watched them fundraise for the Leukemia Foundation. I've read the stories they've sent to me, received postcards from their excursion to Canberra, and more recently FaceTimed them. It's not the same, but it is typical of the support that you get in a country town. Unfortunately, it was discovered that the type of leukemia I had required a stem cell or bone marrow transplant due to high rates of relapse. Transplant is an extremely risky process, but in my case it was worth the risk due to the high mortality rate of the cancer that I have without transplant. And essentially, the benefits outweigh the risks in terms of statistics. Transplant has to be done in Westmead though. So after 3 rounds of chemo in Newcastle, I headed to Sydney. That was mid-July, and I'm still here. A stem cell transplant first involves enough chemo to kill you. Then they harvest stem cells from a donor, in my case my sister, and transplant them into the recipient just like a blood transfusion. Then you wait to see how your body will react to all the chemo and the new cells. My sister's cells started to do their job, but unfortunately my liver reacted pretty badly to the whole process and I ended up spending 10 days in ICU. I put on 28 kilos worth of fluid during that time, and the statistics were definitely not in my favour. But I survived. I'm a very, very lucky girl. After 53 days in hospital, I was finally discharged, but had to stay close to the hospital for around 3 months for close monitoring. On Monday, I found out that I finally get to go home to Tamworth tomorrow. I'll still need to travel back fortnightly for appointments until I'm well enough to have monthly checkups, which can be done in Newcastle. Unfortunately, due to limited services in rural areas, almost all follow-up treatments once I'm home will need to be done in either Newcastle or Sydney. This will obviously involve a lot of travel, and we'll need to find accommodation each time. There are a lot of do's and don'ts after a stem cell transplant. My immune system is currently worse than a newborn's. I have to be very careful of what food I eat and can't be around crowds of people due to risk of them being sick and me catching it. I had to get special permission to be here today, and there's a special safe area for me. Travelling is also tricky as I can't use public toilets. I also need to get all new immunisations and can't start that 18 months process until 6 months post-transplant, which means that I can't go back to work for at least 2 years. Being away from home for such long periods of time is hard. It's really hard. I've had to spend some of the time that I had at home packing my house up so that I could rent it out so that I had some form of income to cover my mortgage. I've had about a month at home in the last 8 months, and 8 days in a row is the longest that I've been at home in that time. My incredible parents have essentially put their lives on hold to come and support me through this last 8 months. They couch surfed for the first couple of months as there were no accommodation available in Newcastle, and then footed the upfront costs and gaps involved for almost 2 months in Sydney until the Leukemia Foundation accommodation finally became available. I've learned a lot since my diagnosis. I've learned to accept help, and I've learned to rely on others like I've never had to before. I've learned an infinite amount of medical knowledge, which in hindsight, I'd be very happy not to know. I've learnt how fragile life is, and how, as cliche as it sounds, to value the gift of time and to enjoy the small things. I've learnt how amazing family is and the importance of knowing what is and isn't worth my energy. I've learnt to let go of control and trust that someone far bigger than I has got me. More than anything, I've learnt the power of positivity. I don't sit around thinking, why me? I don't see the use in that. Why not me? I feel so blessed to have learnt what I have, to have met the people that I have, and to be where I am right now. My story could have ended more than once, well before now, but it didn't. I fought to be where I am, and I have been blessed with this time, and will use these lessons wherever life takes me now. I don't know how long this transplant will work for. I don't know if I'll get hit by a bus on the way home from here. What I do know is that I will endeavour to use my time wisely, and I hope that you do too. Thank you.